I'm Professor Mark Power, the Vice-Chancellor and Chief Executive here at Liverpool-John Moores University, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you to the opening of our 2026 Roscoe Lecture season. We begin with the 28th series of Roscoe Lectures in true style today, with a presentation from our friend and distinguished guest, Peter Elson, one of the city's most captivating storytellers. Many of you will know Peter and his remarkable body of work. A senior feature writer at the Liverpool Daily Post, he spent decades interviewing the great and the good across Merseyside, chronicling the people and moments that have shaped our region. His lifelong passion for maritime history earned him the informal title of the shipping correspondent, and he continues to enrich our understanding of Liverpool's story through his writing, guiding and scholarship. We're also delighted to be joined by Professor Nick White, an imperial and maritime historian, president of the Liverpool Maritime Society, deputy chair of the British Commission for Maritime History, and a co-lead for the Centre for Port and Maritime History, which is a partnership between the University of Liverpool, and the Maritime Museum. This year marks the Centre's 30th anniversary, a milestone that recognises its vital contribution to the study of our city's maritime heritage. Peter has supported the Centre for many years in an advisory role, and Nick has generously agreed to attempt to keep him on track during this afternoon's lecture. So Nick, I wish you the very best of luck.
Thank you.
So thank you all for joining us for what promises to be a memorable event. And it's my pleasure to hand over now to Peter Elson, who will deliver the 178th Liverpool-John Moores University Roscoe Lecture. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I'm absolutely delighted to see so many people here and have the opportunity to bore more than just my family on a wider level about my interest in ocean liners. About 15 years ago, I guess the Dalai Lama came to speak, so it's an enormous privilege to follow in his footsteps. And I remember being on Castle Street, and he actually came over and shook my hand, which I took to be a good omen. So here we are 15 years later, I'm following in his footsteps. Anyway, to the actual matter in hand, my contention is with this lecture is that while everybody's heard of the Titanic, which obviously was a spectacular tragedy, far few people have heard about the Lusitania. And I was talking to a journalist recently, and she'd never heard anything about it at all and seemed quite surprised. And made the remark, oh, and the ship sank, did it? So I feel it's my mission to explain why I think it's so much more important than Titanic. Because the loss of the Lusitania 3 years after the Titanic was vastly more important, because basically it changed the course of modern history, not only in the First World War, which was part of that far larger tragedy, but also in what's followed since then. And I think about 1,200 people died on Lusitania, less than the Titanic, and she went down in 20 minutes, which was compared to the 2 hours, 20 minutes of the Titanic. So in many ways, there's a lot less of stories that accrued. And of course, James Cameron's big blockbuster film put Titanic on the global map in a way that Lusitania hasn't followed. So the question is, why was this well, she was the largest operational ocean liner in the world at the time. Why was she allowed to sail into a war zone, which Germany had made a lot of fuss about, that they wanted to stop Britain being supplied with goods and ammunition and food, and yet still, for some reason, this ocean liner was allowed to steam back and forth in and out of the war zone. So we'll just ask ourselves, well, where did it all start? Well, it started with Stanley Cunard, who was an Anglo-Canadian businessman He managed, with a bit of connivance, to get the Royal Mail contract, the first transatlantic mail contract, and he built a little, fleet of wooden paddle steamers, first of which was the Britannia, and he set sail from Coburg Dock in Liverpool, which is now the marina, the yachting marina, for Boston and New York. And this started the whole Cunard story and led to it becoming one of the most famous shipping lines in the world, if not the most famous. And we move on. 70 years later, Cunard was so successful that with a bit more connivance, they managed to get these huge loans off the government to build the world's first superliner. So you're asking yourself, well, what is a superliner? Well, a superliner is something that is 50% larger than anything else afloat. She also had these newfangled engines called steam turbines, which meant she was far faster than any other ship. And she was preceded by a new class of ships which started to spread around the different shipping lines, and was soon joined by her sister Mauritania. But she was the first. To travel on these ships, if you could afford £100,000 in modern prices, this would buy you a suite on board. Slightly cheaper, for about, I think it's £3,500. You could have a berth in first class. Second class was about £1,500 in modern prices, and in steerage or third class, it would cost you $850. The whole idea, particularly with first class, who were the shipping lines basically milked, was that they had to be kept in their comfort zone. So obviously these suites resembled what the premier passengers would be used to ashore. And they used designers and who created also hotels like the Adelphi and the Cunard headquarters on the pierhead. Everything was of a similar design to make sure that nobody was spooked. But a lot of attention was also paid to, say, third class as well, because the shipping lines, if they delivered people who were sick to New York, then they had to be sent back at their own cost. So it was in the interest of shipping line to give them 3 square meals a day, keep them warm, hot and cold running water, and Lusitania also had self-flushing toilets in third class, because it was assumed that a lot of people travelling third class in steerage wouldn't even know what a toilet was, never mind how to work it. So here Lusitania's just arrived from Scotland, from John Brown Shipyard, into Canada Dock in Bootle, which is still there. She's brand new, and she's there to have her bottom scraped, which most of us would need if we'd been sitting in the River Clyde for 6 months being fitted out. But she was a monster ship. She was giant. Nobody had seen anything like this before. So this is the dry dock, which has been drained of water, and you can just see how huge she was. A view of the grandees from Cunard and the dock company are there. And secret of her high speed was these 4 giant propellers, 23 tons each, made of bronze, and they would revolve at 3 times a second when she was doing top speed, which was quite something for Edwardian engineering. One of the things you keep in mind, and I can find the clicker, is the portside outer propeller, which was the only part of the ship to make it back to Liverpool eventually after she'd been sunk. But the other thing to bear in mind is, my clicker works, you can see the rivets on the bracing of the rudder, and these played a rather unfortunate part later on in our story. So here she is at the pierhead, and you can see this is peak Liverpool. Before everything started, its inexorable slide down to the city we know and love today. So the Royal Liver building there on the right has just been completed, which was the tallest building in Europe for 20 years. You can see tower buildings lurking there, and the Tower of St. Nick sitting on top of a wheelhouse. But she was more than twice the height in length of the, if that makes sense, sorry. Her length was more than twice the height of the Royal Liver buildings. All these ships, in typical fashion, got nicknames, being Liverpool, of course. So Lusitania became Lucy, her sister ship Mauritania became the Maury, their White Star rival, the Olympic, became the Ollie. I don't know about Titanic because she had only lasted about a week or so. So here she is. Liverpool is like the Heathrow of the seas at this time, the epicenter of travel. All these amazing people were pouring in and out. She's just been warped into the landing stage there. You can see the telescopic gangways about to be rolled out to the side of the ship, so first-class passengers could come off the ship straight into the riverside station. Which you can't see, which is behind the ship. But the idea was that the first-class passengers get off the ship, straight across the gangways and onto their waiting Pullman-style train to go to Euston without having to meet any scousers whatsoever. But you can see that hustle and bustle of the landing stage there. This was, as I say, when Liverpool was the Heathrow of the seas, and business was just booming. This is Lusitania doing what she was built to do, which was going at high speed. By this stage, of course, the population is under the cosh of the timetable. We've entered the tyranny of the timetable. The steam age issued in the fact that the ship went, well, from the time of Cunard, really, St. Cunard, the ship went at a certain time, every Wednesday at 2 o'clock. And if you weren't there, you missed it. There was no hanging around like, the wheel fell off the stagecoach and so you retreated to the local hostelry for, 3 days. This was a new age. Time was money. So she could cross the Atlantic in 5.5 days, which was an amazing feat at the time. And she's a microcosm of Edwardian society. First class are kept in the middle here. If you imagine the ship as a giant sort of seesaw, the most comfortable part of the ship is in the middle. And third class steerage literally being over the steering gear there. Single females and families were put there, and single men here up towards the bow, and the second class kind of squeezed in amongst them. But that's how it was organised, and it just really reflected. It's a service, for all the glamour and excitement of these ships, it's a service industry. So you had to reflect what your customer wanted. Interestingly, she's photographed off the old head of Kinsale on the southern coast of Ireland in 1911, and this was exactly where she met her fate 4 years later. The other thing is that she wouldn't move an inch under her own steam without the help of this lot, the Black Gang. 253 men would be slaving in the bowels of the ship to make her go. These are all coal-fired ships at this time. These guys are working round the clock 24 hours on 4-hour shifts within every 24. Absolutely revolting job, really. No health and safety, no equipment apart from shovels and wheelbarrows. So about a third of them would be shifting the coal from the bunkers, and the rest would be shoveling it into the furnaces. And bear in mind, obviously, the ship is rolling and shifting around, and they'd be going through the winter hurricanes and storms, and they still have to keep the furnaces burning. Very high suicide rate amongst them, mainly Irish and Hungarians, who for some reason could tolerate the 50 degrees centigrade in the boiler room. But there are other opportunities as well. For the first time, very varied work was offered to the womenfolk of Merseyside. So there were a lot of jobs on these ocean liners as they grew in numbers to become stewardesses and nurses, because they would be looking after the families and the single women. Segregation was absolutely verboten, and segregation was essential to keep the single men away from the ladies. And that wasn't the case on German liners, and the Americans complained a lot about this, that it was a bit of a mayhem on the German liners in third class, but not on the British ships. So by 1914, they brought in the third of the superliners, the Aquitania, on the left, and these posters kind of convey all the excitement of Liverpool and what the city offered. This is why we were so important. And that kind of self-confidence really still sort of is a seep through to today. So this is Lusitania coming in past Waterloo, I guess where the Iron Men are today. And this is the unmistakable profile of this generation of superliners. So I don't suppose there are many U-boat commanders in the audience tonight, but even if you've not seen this profile before, it's instantly recognizable. And Captain Lieutenant Walter Schweiger, who sank the Lusitania, denied any knowledge that, of what ship he was sinking, which is just ludicrous, basically. So on board, say the ship, a rather fuzzy picture, I'm afraid. These pictures look great on my phone, but sort of, when they've been expanded, they're not quite so good. But the ship was designed in Louis XVI style in first class. One of the top designers, William Miller, was brought in to do this, as I say, who also worked ashore in the hotels for the same sort of passengers. So it's a double-deck restaurant with a domed ceiling, and we can see the lady here doing a kind of Tommy Cooper impression, typical of the style of the time. So this is the first-class music room and lounge. Say a very quiet, sublime effect to it, with its stained glass skylight and a real working marble fireplace at the top end. No expense was spared on these ships. But outside is a different matter. As you can see, the people are bracing themselves as the ship rolls. There's no modern gizmos of stabilizer or anything like that. And speed was of the essence, because a lucrative business was carrying the Royal Mail and the US government mails, and it brought in a lot of cash, but there were penalties, stiff penalties, if the ship was late. So she just bashed through whatever the weather. So in spite of all the luxurious interiors and all the fuss over the great food that was served, a lot of people just spent 5.5 days pinned to their berths as the ship made its way across the Atlantic. I don't know why airline flights have caught on as a result, I don't know. So into our story comes Bowler Bill, Captain William Turner from Crosby. He took command of Lusitania. By now, the First World War has started. His predecessor, Captain Daniel Dow, had a nervous breakdown because although he was very talented seaman, very popular with the passengers, he knew what the risks were going in and out of the war zone that Germany had declared around Britain and Ireland. So Turner replaces him. Turner is made Commodore of the fleet. Very interesting personality. Didn't fit the sort of norm for these guys, who, as well as being very good seamen, also had to be very good socially, smooth operators. They were expected to greet every single first-class passenger as they entered the ship, and to talk to them and keep them happy. And obviously the captain's table was greatly sought after. Turner couldn't stand any of this. He also had a Scouse accent, and he resisted attempts to have elocution lessons, which is what Cunard line demanded. And he also announced the fact that he couldn't stand passengers at all. And he referred to them as a bunch of chattering monkeys. And frankly, he'd rather be sort of steaming around carrying cargoes of pig iron rather than dealing with these people. Luckily, his best friend, Captain John Anderson, a very garrulous Irishman, loved all the crack and bantering with the passengers. So they made a good team. Turner could get on with running the ship, and Anderson dealt with the social side. Very hierarchical. Turner had run away to sea at about the age of 12 or 13, twice shipwrecked on sailing ships, and then he got into Cunard and rapidly went up the ladder. And an interesting insight into his character was that a very wealthy first-class couple were on board in Liverpool, and the wife wanted to go onto the bridge for the ship's departure from the pier head to the Mersey Bar. And she started flirting with Turner, which was a bad idea, because he tried to avoid this kind of contact. And she said, he told her that nobody was allowed on the bridge except the crew during this particular procedure. And she said to him coquettishly, "Well, what if the lady insists?" And he said, "If the lady insists, then I wouldn't think she was a lady at all." stomped off to look at his binnacle. So that was Turner. But in this age, obviously the hierarchy is very important, and the lower grades of seamen would really never have anything to do with them at all. It all would be dealt through the command structure. So meanwhile, over in Berlin, things aren't going too well in the Imperial Palace because Queen Victoria had this idea that if she married each of her 9 children off to the various European households, peace would be guaranteed in this kind of royal family European union. But of course, as we well know, families don't always get on, and there's fallouts and so on. Anyway, she married off her eldest favourite daughter, Victoria, the Princess Royal, to Crown Prince Frederick of Prussia, and it turned out to be a love match. They really got on very well. Princess Victoria, she inherited her father, Prince Albert's brains, and as she observed the rapid industrialization of Germany, she realized that being part of an autocratic family wasn't going to work, and that the Kaiser should stand back and follow the British model and become a constitutional monarch. Of course, this didn't go down too well with the Prussian aristocracy, who didn't like the fact that she was English, even though, of course, the British royal family are basically German. And but anyway, so this push and shove developed, and Kaiser Frederick died quite young of throat cancer, so his son took over. Now, there was a lot of problem between mother and son, a lot of friction. She'd had a very difficult pregnancy with him and had to have a breech birth, forceps delivery, and the problem was that he was disabled and his left arm was left shorter than his right. And he blamed his mother and her English gynecologist, Sir Martin Clark, for the fact that he was disabled. But he was meant to be this Prussian Superman, the warlord leader of the Prussian race. And he felt it was all his mother's fault that this had occurred. And meantime, you've got people like Admiral von Tirpitz, head of the German Navy, and Chancellor Bismarck, who want the status quo. And Kaiser Victoria is pushing the other way for a constitutional monarchy, and in the middle is the son, and he's leaning more towards Bismarck and Tirpitz. But as it turned out, of course, the British royal family were the only ones to survive the First World War. All the other great houses, the Romanovs and the Habsburgs and so on, all disappeared in the First World War. So the moral of this story is he should have listened to Mum. But in all this mess, it turned out that Wilhelm had been starved of oxygen at birth for about 30 seconds. And this turned him into a kind of Trump-like character, where he kept on reversing his opinions and would contradict himself. This left the Navy in a kind of chaotic state. As autocratic dictator, he had final say on everything. And the Navy didn't know, for example, what they should be doing. So basically, they did what they liked. One of the things that they did do was that during the First World War, the Royal Navy, the greatest navy in the world, boxed in the German Navy. So the canny Germans started to develop submarine technology and started rapidly improve the whole submarine design era, and came up with this fleet. And of course, the great thing in a pre-radar electronic age was submarines could sneak underneath the Grand Fleet of the British warships and cause mayhem all over the place. As I said earlier, part of Germany's strategy in the First World War was to starve Britain to death. So if you've got all these U-boats sailing around, torpedoing ships, that's a very good way to implement the policy. But they didn't quite know what they should be doing, what the rules were for engagement, which were changing rapidly anyway. So one of the high flyers of the U-boat fleet was Captain Lieutenant Walter Scheiger, 31, very much regarded as somebody destined for the top things, and he was the whisperer in the ear of Admiral von Tirpitz. And so he fed a lot of frontline information into Tirpitz's ear, and this followed through into the strategy that Germany had. Meantime, of course, we've got the Lusitania sailing back and forth in and out of the war zone. Nobody seems to really care. So the Germans had decided, who were followed, tracking her. She was the ultimate trophy, so they knew exactly where she was at any time. And she was being watched in New York. They had spies all over the place. And next to one of her sailing bills, in fact, it was the final voyage, they put this notice warning that travellers did so at their own risk. The German ambassador, he thought the whole thing was just a terrible idea and tried to hide this notice, put it away on a desk until he was told by the Kaiser he had to put it in the paper. So people were starting to get very nervous about travelling on the ship. Her sort of unique selling point was that she was so fast, no submarine could catch up with her. But anyway, here she is setting out on her last voyage, departing New York on the 1st of May 1915. Cunard made this kind of rather feeble attempt to disguise her by painting her funnels black instead of the traditional Cunard red and black. And nevertheless, a very healthy booking still at this time. These ships, of course, were incredibly expensive. So her two sister ships, Aquitania and Mauretania, were laid up. They were tucked away in Bootle. And the White Star rivals, the Olympic and the Britannic, were in Belfast. So she was the one and only ship still running, still making money for the company. And it was all perhaps rather cynical. Anyway, off she goes. Amongst the famous passengers were Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, one of the richest men in the world. He inherited this huge transport fortune. The Vanderbilts were founders of the New York Central Railroad, and but he was third generation, so he wasn't too bothered about, points failure at Palookaville Central or replacement bus services to Buffalo. He was devoted to fast women and slow horses. They were his main hobbies. And he was on the ship to go to a meeting of the International Horse Show in London, and also to finance a fleet of ambulances for Britain in the First World War. He'd missed the Titanic by a couple of days. He was due to sail on it, but because of business in Paris, he didn't take that voyage. So he survived that, but the morning of the sailing, he got a telegram from somebody with the pseudonym of Morte, saying the Lusitania is doomed, do not sail on her. But he was a fatalist and decided to go ahead anyway. At this time, of course, Liverpool attracted these sort of people who were passing through it. It was as if the Bill Gates and the Jeff Bezos and all the rest of them were in and out of the city all the time and owned chunks of it as well, and companies. So the Vanderbilts were even members of the Royal Merseyside Yacht Club. That's the level that the city was operating back then. Next to him is Charles Frohman, who was a top Broadway producer of the time, and he was coming over on the ship to check out the West End and see any plays he could take back to New York. And he was regarded as one of the great wits of the time. And some of his sayings are still in circulation today. He was overseeing a production with the Edwardian lady, Mrs. Patrick Campbell, and she was chewing the scenery somewhat, and he told her to tone it down. And she replied to him rather haughtily, "But I am an artiste." To which he replied, "Don't worry, dear, your secret's safe with me." And also on board was Sir Hugh Lane, who was director of the National Gallery of Ireland, and he had with him paintings by Rembrandt, Rubens and Monet, which had been on sale in New York, but regarded a bit too racy, a bit too fleshy for New York taste at that time. So they were put in sealed tubes, and he was travelling with them, and they were insured for about £234 million in current money. All three of these gentlemen were lost, including the paintings, which were never seen again. So there we go. So the ship's now completed 90% of her journey, about 18 hours to go to get into Liverpool, due in on May the 8th at 6:53 precisely in the morning. Captain Turner knew all about the U-boats. He'd been getting warnings about where they were. They were lurking off the coast of Southern Ireland here and in Liverpool Bay there. But he was trapped between a fast-net rock and a hard place, really, because whatever he did put him in danger. So there was a possibility that he could go fast past the southern coast of Ireland and then slow down and wait for the high tide to come into Liverpool, because the ship needed a lot of water underneath her, but a draft about 30 feet, or he could slow down around the coast of Ireland and then accelerate across the Irish Sea and straight into Liverpool. And that's what he decided to do, and unfortunately it was the wrong decision. May the 7th was a beautiful day, lovely spring afternoon, and a lot of people were out on deck. It was about 2 o'clock, just after lunch had finished, and and then what you know, several people on deck suddenly saw this wake streaking across the sea towards them. Others saw a periscope of the submarine, and travelling about 40 miles an hour, the torpedo from U-20 hits the ship and creates this enormous explosion where the spray goes about 60 foot in the air, hits the ship in a very vulnerable point in the forward boiler room, and mayhem ensues on board. Because what happened was, with the design of the ship, Cunard got this huge loan to build her on the basis that the government could convert her into a warship when needed, which was just a very stupid idea. It didn't work out. But what happened was that the Admiralty insisted that there was a steel bulkhead, like a giant wall of steel, running from the bow right the way through to the stern, down the middle of the ship. This meant when the torpedo struck and about 200 square feet of steel was blown out of the ship, and it was about an inch thick, beneath the waterline, all the water rushed in, and so the ship immediately started to tip over. Unlike the Titanic, which remained on an even keel, Lusitania started immediately tilt to the starboard, to the right side, and this caused, really responsible for the high death toll. So down in the second-class dining room, sorry, it's a bit fuzzy, 200 people were all just finishing off lunch, and they all jumped to their feet simultaneously and tried to leave the dining room at once. There was a gentleman called the Reverend Robert Wyther, who was a priest on his honeymoon, who stood up at the top of the staircase and told everybody to not panic and sit down. He was immediately mown over in the crush of people trying to leave. I mean, if you've been on the London Tube and it's all very crowded, and the crowd is being gradually sort of moved forward onto the trains, you can imagine that's a situation, but with the floor tilting, and it's as if somebody shouted, "There's a bomb in here," or something, and everybody tries to leave at once. There was just total mayhem. There was a lady called Margaret Cox, who was travelling with her baby Desmond, and she just finished her lamb chop, which had been specially cooked for her by the steward, and she had to grab the child and rushed up onto the boat deck, and hear more of her later. When the torpedo struck also, it sent a sonic shockwave through the ship, and this meant that it distorted the whole hull, and they couldn't close the watertight doors, and also it exploded all the glassware on board, so all the plant pots exploded as well, scattering leaves and trunks everywhere. And also in the Veranda Cafe on first class, which is very popular, all the hanging baskets plummeted down onto the people enjoying their post-lunch coffee. In fact, there were two people in there. It was 23-year-old Harold Bolton, a former soldier who wanted to join up again, and a gentleman, an Arctic explorer called Commander Stackhouse. Stackhouse was explaining to the young man why the ship couldn't be sunk when the torpedo hit, and the deck above immediately split, and the water tank above burst, showering them with water. So Bolton did survive, Stackhouse didn't. But the ship by now is running out of control, because all the services started to shut down, and within 4 minutes they couldn't control her. Up in the wheelhouse, it had filled with coal dust because the torpedo hit the bunkers as well. And the quartermaster, Hugh Johnson from Bootle, couldn't see where he was going. Turner is telling him to try and steer the ship ashore to beach her. That's what he decided would be the best thing to do. But the whole issue of getting on the lifeboats was very problematic because they hadn't had proper lifeboat drills in case it frightened the passengers. And the two problems were that on the port side, the left-hand side, as you can see, as the ship heels over, people couldn't launch the lifeboats properly. There was no clear drop into the sea, unlike on the Titanic, which stayed exactly upright. And when they did manage to launch the boats, they rolled down the side of the ship, and those rivets I referred to earlier ripped the side of the boats open. So everybody was just thrown out. So even if you got into a lifeboat, it didn't mean you were safe. On the starboard side, the right-hand side, the boat swung out, and it also meant that because of the ship, of course, leaning forwards, it was uneven, and when they were trying to drop the lifeboats, some of them fell on top of the lifeboats which had already been launched, and everybody inside got crushed. So it was absolute mayhem, as you can imagine. Also, a number of the crew had deserted in New York because they didn't want to fight in World War I. So it was a bit of a motley crew, many of whom didn't know what they were doing. So that this altogether created further panic. And by now the passengers are really starting to become very frightened indeed, and people are doing strange and stupid things. And there was a case of a lady called Margaret Henshaw. She just tucked up her baby Constance, into the berth, and she then felt the tremor going through the ship. She knew what it was, gathered up baby Constance, remembered there was another baby in the cabin next door, a little boy of 18 months, and his parents were nowhere to be seen. So she went to the next cabin, and she couldn't lift up the little boy in the berth, but she got Constance under her arm, and the ship is starting to heel over. She didn't dare put Constance down, and she had to leave the cabin. She later got into a lifeboat, which then tipped over. She was thrown into the sea, and she lost baby Constance. So this was very traumatic, obviously, and she was later rescued and lived quite a long life. But she said the thing that haunted her, not so much the loss of her daughter, but also the blue eyes, this innocent boy staring up at her that she had to leave behind. This was symptomatic of some of the post-traumatic stress disorder that everybody had to contend with. There was a nurse from Canada called Alice Middleton. She also got tipped out of a lifeboat, and a lot of the portholes in the ship were open because it was fair weather, no air conditioning obviously in those days. And as the ship went down, she got sucked into this porthole and thought her brain was going to explode, but somehow managed to get out. She comes to the surface, and next to her is a pregnant woman giving birth, screaming her head off. And obviously both the woman and the newly born baby are drowned in this sea of people. And she remembered later what an irony it was that this woman was giving birth in a sea of babies and children around her, because there were a lot of children travelling on the ship on this occasion. So one of the wonders of the ship were the electric lifts, and you can probably guess what's coming. People crammed into them as soon as they heard the explosion, and of course the systems failed as the boiler pressure dropped down in the engine room. Everything is linked to that, therefore the lifts jammed between the floors and people were trapped in them. They got special safety features to make sure you couldn't get out between the different decks, and of course this worked to the disadvantage of the people, well, tragic disadvantage. In the same way, the ship had giant meat lifts to the kitchens, and when the torpedo struck, a lot of the galley crew crammed inside, and again the lifts jammed because the systems failed. Apparently they'd already gone through a form of hell, because when the sonic shockwave went through the ship, all the pots and pans started ping-ponging across the place like billiard balls, including the ones on the hob, so boiling water was thrown over the crew. One of the saddest stories is about a 16-year-old scullion called George Wynne, and he had got a job for his disabled father peeling vegetables on board the ship. George couldn't swim, but his father Joe could, and Joe went looking for a life jacket and was never seen again. And George, the teenager, survived and had to go and tell his mother. Initially, he telegraphed her to say that his dad was safe, but then had to tell her face to face that he'd lost his father in the disaster. So the ship is rapidly going down, although Captain Turner tries to put the engine in reverse. She's out of control. They can't steer her. The hydraulic steering has failed. She's now going around in a big circle, and but the propellers are still turning. And one of the problems with launching lifeboats, well, you should never get into a lifeboat while a ship's moving. That's an order, because several of the lifeboats were sucked into the propellers, which by now have reached the surface and are acting like giant meat mincing machines. And as the boats come into the wake of the ship and are sucked in, everybody's literally just chopped up. And so they're some of the few people who actually made it into a lifeboat, then die in this absolutely horrific way. So there we go. So she's really making a death plunge now. One of the things that, of course, this very vivid painting by, again, Ken Marshall, is you can't hear the noise. Everything inside the ship is now falling forward, and there's a horrific noise coming out of all the vents. You can see where the steam is being released, and everybody on the decks, and when it's on the decks, can hear everybody inside screaming as they literally die inside the ship. Because the other thing about the services failing was all the lights went out, unlike on the Titanic. So if you're below decks, you're in darkness, the walls are becoming floors and all the rest of it, the floors and the ship is rapidly turning over. So she's getting lower and lower in the water. She's only in about 350 feet of water. So as she goes down, the bow hits the seabed and she kind of settles back. So people are moving towards the stern, those who have not got in the lifeboats. Charles Bowring, whose family gave their name to Bowring Park, of course, he's a major ship owner. He's having lunch in first class at the purser's table when the torpedo strikes, which he says is like the sound of a giant barn door being slammed shut in the wind. He goes out to help with people getting into their life jackets and jumps into the sea. And before that, he sees Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt is there with his valet, and Vanderbilt had got his valet to line up any of the children he could find who were just running around in a panic, couldn't find their parents. And Vanderbilt is methodically putting their life belts on them, on each child, and that was the last thing we'd ever seen. As I say, he dies in the accident. This is rather a vivid portrayal of the ship, kind of more impressionistic, and the funnel's red and black instead of being all black. But it does give an impression, I guess, of what it was like for the people panicking. Margaret Cox, who we remember was finishing her chop, she gets onto the deck with baby Desmond, loses her footing, drops baby Desmond, who rolls down the boat deck, but just as the water surges up and washes baby Desmond back into her arms. So she managed to clamber up to one of the last lifeboats. The crew are screaming at her, so she throws baby Desmond into the lifeboat, but then can't face the jump of about 6 foot across. But luckily the crew pick her up and literally toss her into this full lifeboat, which is then lowered, and it manages to clear the ship. But everybody's hysterical, and they won't give her baby Desmond back. And she ends up, she's very, very kind of feisty Irish woman, ends up punching several people in order to get the baby Desmond back to her. So all these stories that are going on, all these individual sort of horrors. So as the ship goes down, several people do notice, this is slightly over-imaginative, the U-boat does pop up. The conning tower comes up, not the whole U-boat, but Schweiger watches the ship, and he decides not to launch a second torpedo because so many people are in the water, which is very good of him. So he has a look at his handiwork, and off he goes pursuing another Cunard liner, but he can't quite catch up with her. He does try and torpedo this second ship, but he misses. So it's all about good fortune, really. After the ship goes down, the debris field is about half a mile across, just this kind of matting of dead people and injured people, some people alive, with everything that floats on it. A businessman called Michael Byrne, who was a good swimmer, managed to swim away from the ship. He said it was like, at one point, swimming through a lily pond of dead babies, all staring up at the sky. Because what had happened in first class on the boat deck, they put all the babies out for a post-lunch nap under the awning, because it was such a lovely day. As the ship went down, a large wave just came across and swept them all off the ship. And they were just there in this sort of large cohort together, floating away. And Burns said they were just all staring up into the sky. One of the problems also, if you were lying in the sea, which is about 10 degrees, so quite chilly, and a lot of people died of hypothermia, particularly the elderly and children, was that seagulls would swoop down and peck your eyes out, because you'd be leaning backwards and, of course, glinting rather temptingly to the birds flying overhead. So it was about 3 hours before the first rescue ships arrived. Mabel Henshaw, who'd lost baby Constance, she was pulled in, as was the young man Michael Bolton, and they were just put on the rescue ships on piles of dead bodies, because they were thought to be, had expired themselves, and eventually, to the shock of the crew, came round. But as you can see, people are in a dreadful state, and they're in Cove, which was called Queenstown at the time, which is the nearest port, and this gentleman on the left apparently wouldn't take off his life jacket because he was just so traumatised. Meanwhile, back at the Admiralty, Winston Churchill is First Lord of the Admiralty, and Jackie Fisher on the right is First Sea Lord. So Churchill is in charge of the political side as a cabinet minister, and Fisher is in charge of the Navy, the actual operational side. They couldn't stand each other. Two brilliant men with egos to match, and they were constantly rowing over policy, the latest thing being the Gallipoli campaign. But one thing that they did agree on was it was all Captain Turner's fault. So Turner here, he's papped for the newspapers, nothing new there. These photographers out there taking their chances. And in his shrunken uniform, in a state of great distress, going around telling everybody he'd lost his ship. He was one of the last people to get off the ship, along with Quartermaster Johnson, and they literally just stepped into the ocean and were then picked up. He must have been a tough old thing, because he was 3 hours in the water and survived. It's quite interesting, some of the reactions of the survivors. Two old ladies complained about these two ginger-haired scouse stokers who rescued them, and they complained to Cunard later about the very choice language that these young men would use. So there's thanks for you. So only 6 of the 48 lifeboats made it to shore. 3 years after the Titanic, Lusitania was stuffed with lifeboats, but as you've seen, it was very difficult to launch them, so it really didn't make a lot of difference. So these are the lifeboats that were taken to Queenstown, Cove as now is. 140 people were buried 3 days later. Bodies were being constantly washed ashore, and they were gathered together in morgues. Captain Anderson, he died as well, and I think Turner had to go and identify his body as his best friend. I mean, it was just, and that's just one instance of hundreds and hundreds of people having to do this. Families having lost children, people having to come to terms with not only the destruction of their families, but the best friends on board, or colleagues, or shipmates, and so on. They had to go through all this trauma. So here are some of the survivors back in Liverpool. You probably recognise the facade of Lime Street behind them, in a motley collection of clothes, which the people of Cove, I've got to say, really stepped up to the plate, and the survivors were as well looked after as they could be. This must be only 3 out of the 35 babies on board survived, which I presume is one of them on the right-hand side, I guess. So quick, we won't test you on this later, but this gives you some idea of the losses on board. So 1,264 boarded, 788 died, and if you're a crew member, that was also pretty grim. Only just over 290 survived. And I say those down in the engine room, of course, took the really big hit. Because the big issue about the ship was, and her sinking was there a second torpedo, which becomes quite important for the inquiry. New York Times front page splash got it more or less spot on. The grade crisis is at hand. They mentioned about the Frohman and Vanderbilt were lost. So that's pretty accurate. Amazing for the time that they got all this information together. So there was a huge backlash in Liverpool. This photograph was taken actually in London of German businesses and people being persecuted, probably living blameless lives for years and years in Britain. But the wrath of local people, particularly in Liverpool, was of course the breadwinners amongst the crew were all lost. So there was a great deal of anger that was expressed against anybody with a German name or even looked German. Immediately the propaganda machine went into overdrive. Britain took full chance to make the most of it for recruitment for the First World War. Churchill tries to get the American president involved, for something like 124 Americans died on the ship. Woodrow Wilson, although privately said, I can't believe that any nation that considered itself civilized would do this to a ship full of people. And Churchill didn't realize that, of course, 10% of people in America were of German origin, so there wasn't a great deal of sympathy. What brought Germany into the war was, America into the war was the Zimmerman telegram, where Arthur Zimmerman, who was a senior civil servant, suggested to the Mexicans that they attack America from the southwest to take their attention away from joining the Allies in Europe. Turner survives, but like everybody with the Titanic say, he's tainted by this notion of disaster. He's given a second-rate liner called the Ivernia to command, and that is also sunk. Comes back to Liverpool after the war. He wants to take command of the Aquitania, but he's given a desk job instead. So he gets totally cheesed off. So the ship is explored in the 1993 by Robert Ballard, who discovered the Titanic, and he confirmed that all the holds had been cleared out. This was done by the Admiralty in the 1930s and the 50s to make sure that nobody thought there was illegal munitions on board the ship, which would make her a legitimate target for the Germans to attack. So, as I say, the only part of the ship that made it back to Liverpool later on was Ballard donated one of her propellers, the port-out propeller, which sits outside the Museum of Liverpool, and every May the 7th there's a ceremony to mark it. So the main memorial in Liverpool is what's known as the Titanic Memorial, but is actually a memorial to both the heroes of the engine room who survived, kept the ships going, the services going under attack. So it represents both the Titanic and the Lusitania. White Star Line, who owned the Titanic, weren't at all happy about this monument being put up like the worst possible advert to people crossing the Atlantic. But as this typical Liverpool row ground on, Lusitania was sunk, so it became a joint memorial. And interestingly, behind it is Queen Mary II, the current flagship of the Cunard line. She is a direct descendant, fourth generation descendant of Lusitania. And by sheer chance, I managed to photograph her sitting at the very berth that Lusitania used back and forth over 100 times from Liverpool to New York. So the legacy, unfortunately, is that a free-for-all began. It broke cruise rules, which were meant to be this international agreement that everybody on board a ship, if it was under attack, they were allowed to take to the lifeboats. Schweiger broke that rule because basically he was allowed to by the German Admiralty, and so therefore all of us now are part of any war that takes place. So immediately after this, German Zeppelins start bombing London, so the fact that you're civilian and neutral doesn't matter. We're all fair game. Wars are now to be run on an industrial level. They're supposed to be efficient, fast and cheap. And so if it involves bombing, blowing up, killing the ordinary innocent citizenry, it doesn't matter. That's the game now. So there we go. I should say that I've in the past been rather cynical about people who pray for world peace, but I think maybe it's our only hope. So I'm not going to say let us pray, but thank you very much indeed for paying attention.